All right, let's talk about the rise in rebellion by that's symbolized by the French Yellow Vest movement. That's uh, shown uh, in the school student walkout rebellion. That's shown with the women's march, and that's shown in the the uh, rebellion in Ukraine against their criminal occupation dictatorship, which is who passed a law about overtime and increasing 200 hours per year without pay. Well, they call it deferred payment. And the Ukrainians have said that it's basically slavery. And now this is going on all over the West, all over Europe, all in and this is basically what the media also calls austerity measures. And austerity measures is nothing more than a fancy word to say we're robber barons, we're the dictators, and we control the wealth, we control the resources, and thereby we control you. And you are nothing more than disposable commodities because there will always be more of you basically useless and useless and unnecessary, and we'll just we will do what we want, and what you want does not matter. And that I keep calling it organized crime, like mafia and the yakuza and all those, and it's the same exact mentality. In the olden days, they called it feudalism. Later, they termed it robber barons. Earlier they called it robber barons, which led to feudalism, and so it's all the same. It's all the same, but this touches upon the interconnection of what all this means. Why Western nations, and it's not just the U.S., but it's the Western nations. Because if you understand something, is that when the UN and the media, I'm sorry, forget about the UN. When you hear the Western media talk about 50 nations backing a coup against Venezuela, out of the UN body, which is over 190 something countries, that's vastly that 50 is really just Western nations and the robber barons whom they've propped up, or later on they'll the Western media will call them dictators. But the reason for this is it's not just you have to understand the Western nations have dictatorships. They're robber barons, and they are backed by what the Western nations like to call corporations, and the generational wealthy families, and and the new wealth that the old wealthy generational families have allowed, or they were put in a position where the very rules and regulations that they set left loopholes where new wealth could come in, and so you either go fight them or you work with them. So the new wealth, there's just all this media, these entertainment media about Facebook, and the movies are about Facebook, about Google and Microsoft and Silicon Valley and all. So and the media, or just simple media push to prop up these new robber barons, such as Facebook, Google, also the what's that? Tesla, the guy from Tesla. So, but the reason why, so going back, the reason why coups are done is to prop up the robber barons, the dictators, because they need, and that's another reason why they allowed new money to come into the fold, because they need greater numbers, greater resources to shape the quote unquote economy, thereby the politics, and fund the leg breakers, the occupation, the domestic occupation forces called police and law enforcement, as well as judges and others, so that they can, and also the media, so that they can have control, so that they can try to control the situation. And the more allies you have, and the more you can sow confusion, or put or keep the ways to control, to keep the people from the peasants and under control. That's what you want. The South American and Central American and other places around the world, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, if you can prop up these places, later on you can say, later on you can get cooperate with them, because you give them tit for tat. And what ends up happening is, so when you need in the West to turn the media and put out a narrative and say, now we need to call them dictators, because there's plenty of evidence of where the people that they propped up, the people that they put in power, such as the Shah of Iran, after they took out the democratically elected government, they can turn around and say, the Iranians are a dictatorship, even though the very people that they put in were the actual robber barons, and the puppets and co-conspirators. So this is another way for them to keep control, and to so they also need an enemy. So they call Russia, or China, or India or Pakistan or whoever, or North Korea. They need a way to keep their domestic public, and when I say their domestic public, I'm talking about where they in every place that they have control. They need a boogeyman, and so what do? You use sanctions, you use wars, you use your so-called intelligence agencies, who are basically no more than legitimized paid saboteurs to destabilize places, and so that there can be so they can focus their own domestic public on elsewhere, so that they can continue to do their criminal activities, and that is the crux of what always takes place. It's not a new thing. It's always been done this way, and this is from the playbook. And when and they know that doing this has adverse effects, and which is why they have to start, because people start to learn, start to get it, because when it keeps continually happening, when things go out of whack for people constantly, and there was always always a focus on, in the domestic front, it's the minorities, it's the blacks, it's the later on it's the Muslims, later on it's the evangelicals, later on it's the they have to always give you a boogeyman, a demon. So it doesn't matter. They need to take the focus off of them. And the reason why you have the rise in what they call fascism, the ones that actually get more and more violent, is because the people behind the show, the ones behind the throne, like the Kochs, the Mercers, the Sheldon Adelson, and all these and the old families like the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the one that the Vanderbilts, all these old moneyed people, and all the new money people who have been actually doing this behind the thrones, behind the seats of power. They have to when they start getting exposed, such as the Koch brothers. Okay, when their names start popping up, they have to start taking more active roles. They can't do this from the shadows anymore. So you now have the control of the media. You now have the control of the so-called legitimate institutions and think tanks, and and you have influence in the and you place influence in with centers of education, so you can continue this, trying to get this focus off, so that you blame the general public, you blame welfare queens, you blame this, you blame that, all to take the focus away from them. These are, the shadow rulers are the bankers, those people that have monopolies in industry. These are your shareholders. The ones that are billionaires. These are Jeff Bezos. All of them. Jeff Bezos had to buy the Washington Post. Why? Because he needed to take more active roles because his name was popping up. This is the same thing whether you live in the UK, whether you live in anywhere in Europe, whether you live in Australia, New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Even the Nordic countries, whether you live in East Europe or West Europe, whether you live in the island territories off the coast of Argentina, which was part of Argentina before the British invaded and basically took over that. Whether you live in the U.S. territories or the British territories or the French territories or the German territories, the ones that are all by the name colonies. You and if the and why you allow others such as what's such as what happened in South Africa, what happened in India, what happened here and there over Pakistan. You need a boogeyman, you need an enemy for your domestic public's consumption, so that they can't focus and know who the true enemy is, know who their real enemy is, the ones that's doing them harm, catastrophic harm, on a very personal, deep level. And those are your shadow rulers. And all these, and even the so-called progressive independent media keeps using the wrong terminology. They're not dictators. They're allies. They're convenient allies at the time, until they become inconvenient, and then they are made to be the enemies when it becomes inconvenient. But they are all, it's an all interconnected game to them. You know, Blacklist, the show Blacklist, explains it perfectly. If you watch the show Blacklist, from the first season all the way up, that is basically what the Blacklist is talking about. Are the shadow rulers. The show that had to do with AIs and the control. That is what they're talking about. That AI is just a metaphorical shadow rulers. These are themes and topics that are called conspiracy or just fiction, and but they are in fact real. They have been operating for hundreds upon hundreds of years. This is what has caused every war, and a war is nothing more than them manipulating the public to fight each other, to kill each other. And they call it politics, and they call it Nazism, they call it this, they call it that. But basically what you're doing when you go to war is you're fighting to give money and resources and your lives, or our lives, to hand them more power, more resources. And this in turn also, in the later stages, warps even any minutia of sanity. And the other thing that brings about the fascism that a lot of people, when they hear the word fascism, they think about violent governments that suppress or oppress, and they start using mass killings and genocides. Well, the insanity level gets to the point where that actually happens because all they know how to do is using the hammer, because we are just all nails. At that point, when everything is a nail and the only resource to combat the nails who are starting to get wise to it is to use the hammer. So this is what always happens. There is a period where there seems to be prosperity, there seems to be more equality, and there seems to be a semblance of justice, but that doesn't actually exist. And after a time, any reasoning rationale starts to degrade and starts to crumble, because the infighting of the robber barons fighting amongst themselves, okay, gets to the point where they start to destabilize. That's why you have the economic collapses, the depressions, because they're infighting amongst themselves. And that infighting, they have to use us, the nails, okay, the peasantry, to fight their battles for them. So they will use, there are some groups will use minorities, saying, calling out the injustice done to them by them, and some will do what people label as conservatives. So they'll start taking up racism and classism as the weapon to draw in the right-wing side. And others will try to muddy both sides. And it's a fight, and we are used to do their fighting for them. So that way they need media, they need education to sow these things through institutes and think tanks and all sorts of other. This is a long history of it. It's been happening. It happened during the time of the Roman Empire. It happened in the time of the Mongolian Empire. It's happened in every empire where sanity becomes very, very loose and to the point of being unhinged. And any reasoning rationale starts to disappear. And violence is the last course, because it is the only course. It is the only option, because nothing else comes to mind for them. Because they've lost sanity. They are insane. It's not just the Republicans in the United States. It's the Democrats. It's not. It's the Libertarians. It's all of them. Even elements of that call themselves progressives are, in fact, part of those machinations. The progressives, the true ones, are more reasonably rational, but they are still part of the system. They are still part of the control mechanism to control the masses. FDR and all those, they were part of the system. They were part of the alliance. To control the peasant masses. the inconsequential masses. If you notice, I like Bernie, and I think he is genuine in certain ways. But have you ever noticed how he constantly calls the people that Republicans and the corporate Democrats, how he calls them, Dee, shut up! How he calls them friends. And he won't backpedal on that. That's because he is part of the system. He may not be a witting part of the system, but he is part of the system. There's a new crop that's popping up, and there are some inconsistencies because they are espousing things that Bernie has been talking about consistently for decades, but there are some inconsistencies, and that's because once you're in the system, it degrades and denigrates the sanity, which is why if we want to make the change, we have to start calling it what it is. It is not corruption, it is crime. It is not immorality, it is evil. It is wrong. It is criminal. We must not expect them to apologize. We must make them pay. We must state what is right and what is wrong. We cannot say, oh, they have the freedom from the First Amendment to speak out. We must say, no, you are not allowed to foment sedition. You are not allowed to peddle sedition. That the country is the people and not the physical aspects. And when you foment sedition, meaning misinformation or bigotry or hypocrisy, then you are, in fact, committing sedition. When you divide the country, you are committing sedition. When you write policies because for the good of your local community that you're supposed to that you represent, you are in fact committing sedition because it is helping the robber barons. You are not representing the people, you are helping the robber barons. The criminals, the robber barons, the criminals, you are helping them. You are not representing the people, the country. And when you have laws, when you have common laws that should be across the board throughout the entirety of the country, and yet you allow contradictions, you are committing sedition. You are creating division. You are putting up the framework for violence, bigotry, hypocrisy. A nation only works when there is an established common law based on natural laws. When equality is truly equal. When everybody is on the right natural wavelength. That is the only way a true democracy works. And that is basically the concept of socialism, communism, all those things that are vilified. Reason why, Paraconus, the reason why that all those are vilified is because it takes away the ability of the legitimate criminals to keep a system that advances their good while suppressing and oppressing and creating fascism for all. In other words, there's a great thing: injustice for all, with the caveat of except us, the robber barons. Injustice for all, except us, the robber barons. That is also American exceptionalism. It is not, when they're talking about American exceptionalism, they're not talking about the country, they're talking about themselves. That is exceptional. Everything applies, including whatever arbitrary things that we want to place and we want to propose and we want to make into laws and rules and regulations. Everything applies to you, no matter how insane or irrational it is, or how unjust and unequal it is. Everything applies to you. We are the exception. That is how it works. That is a dictatorship. That is everything that the media and the intellectuals will say. That is exactly what it is. You have a tiny margin of criminals, overwhelmingly surrounded in a sea of enemies. And that sea of enemies is the people. So you have to always warp it. You have to bring others into it. You have to give them the illusion that they can somehow reach their level, when that is extremely rare, because most of those, even like Bill Gates and Microsoft, Warren Buffett, George Soros, what's his name from Facebook, the guys from Google, GM, Ford, DuPont, all of them. Most of them already had connections, already had connection to the shadows, to the shadow rulers, the shadow dictators, the robber barons. Which is why they need to make movies about them. Which is why they need to put in the media and prop them up. Which is why they have to say they rose up from their bootstraps, because they already had connections, or they were given the opportunity. The guy from Starbucks, he was given the ability, that he was deemed worthy of coming into the ranks. And it's for multiple reasons, as I've explained in this video. Understand, dictatorships are everywhere. In China, in Russia, in India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, in the UK, in all across Europe, in Australia, South America, Central America, North America. It doesn't matter. The dictators are there. And we are the nails. We are the peasantry. We are the inconsequential. We are the commodities, and we are the resources that keeps them in power. And that's because we play by their rules, we do not educate ourselves, and because we are purposely driven with by the shadow rulers, the dictators, the robber barons, to fight amongst ourselves, to divide ourselves. I use this final analogy. Think about the movie The Wizard of Oz, and that scene where the Wizard of Oz is behind that is behind that curtain, and he says, "Don't look at the man behind the curtain. That is your robber baron. That is your dictator. That is where all of it happens. If it's visible and they call it government, then you know for a fact that there's a shadow rule." And I'll be honest with one last thing. There are some who have not reached the level of insanity. There are some, like the Swedish company, who are robber barons. All right, the shadow robber barons who do implement insane aspects outside of where they reside. With the way that Nestle has been extracting water, basically stealing water all over the world, including in the United States, and making a profit for it. But that's a war coffer. Understand what it is. It's a war coffer. It's a war chest. Because they are at war. The rise of monopolies, final thing, the rise of monopolies is a war among the shadow rulers. It's a war that will inevitably bring us into it, the peasantry, the nails, to be the hammer for the power, resources, and control of the shadow rulers, the robber barons, the true criminal elite, the ones that commit that that foster genocide, that foster the most inhuman and despicable and heinous actions. That is the crux, the nut, the core of it.